everyone, and welcome to Seriously Risky Biz. This is the podcast we do here at Risky Business, all about cybersecurity policy and intelligence. My name is Amberleigh Jack, and in just a moment I'll bring in Tom Uren, our policy and intelligence editor, to talk about the Seriously Risky Business newsletter that has been published this week. And you can, of course, read that and subscribe over at our website, risky.biz. First, though, I would like to thank the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation for supporting Tom's work here, and also Lawfare, who syndicate Tom's newsletter and publish it on the Lawfare Media website. And finally, this week's edition is sponsored by Push Security. You can find them at pushsecurity.com. So big thanks to them for that. And jumping straight into it, g'day Tom, thanks for joining me.
G'day Amberleigh, how are you?
Oh, not too bad, mate. And you've written about a few things in this week's newsletter. And the first one I want to jump into is Google is starting its own cyber disruption unit. And from what we can gather, I guess it'll be a team that'll seek out opportunities to kind of proactively disrupt threat actor campaigns. And we don't seem to have a lot of details yet. Apparently those will come later. But what are you expecting from this unit, Tom?
Yeah, so I thought this news was really interesting because there's, over the years, been this ebb and flow and talk about hacking back, which is the idea that companies would be able to hack back against threat actors that attack them. And the underlying sentiment behind that is that other states use their private sector in all sorts of ways to enable state capacity. Yet America's private sector is essentially somewhat restrained based on, upholding things like laws. And there's this problem which is correct, like other states use the private sector, the US doesn't. How do we fix that? And on the other, I guess the downside is that letting everyone hack anything because they get attacked is just a terrible idea. So that's been the debate for like maybe 10, 15 years. And in recent years, there's been this gradual shift to private sector companies doing more. So this, I feel, is a very significant moment because Google is one of the larger players and it said we want to do more disruptive stuff. Now, there's actually a template for doing disruptive stuff legally that Microsoft pioneered, I guess, from 2010 onwards. And they've done like maybe close to a dozen disruption operations where they go and get court authorization. They use things like trademark law, abuses of America's hacking law, and different legal, I wouldn't call them loopholes, but opportunities, and say, because of this, these baddies are doing these things, they're infringing our trademarks, they're hurting our customers. Judge, please give us the right to take down those domains. And so they've pioneered that. They've done a lot. Google has done just two. So I feel like at a bare minimum, it's got to be, we're going to try and do these kind of court-authorized things.
Yeah.
Now, I felt it was really significant that Google's Sandra Joyce, who's the vice president of their threat intelligence group, she made this comment at a keynote at a conference that was devoted to exploring the idea of hacking back. So I think if you just say it in isolation, like maybe it just does mean doing what Microsoft has done, replicating that model, doing it more aggressively, like devoting resources to doing that. But I think when you put it in the context of like the conference, the title was Offensive Cyber Operations, Legal, overcoming legal and strategy challenges, something like that. That's a very different kind of place to say that statement.
I mean, as you touched on, Tom, these sort of court-endorsed hacking back isn't new, and
yeah, I wouldn't call it hacking back so much as giving it extra powers. So there's not in those cases been hacking back. There's been a couple of cases where Microsoft has worked with the FBI, and the FBI has gotten a court order to be able to do things like remove web shells from infected hosts. So that I would call a form of hacking back, and that's legally authorized. And the FBI can do it because they have this authority to do stuff when a court says they can. So I don't really imagine that Google will start to do that kind of hacking back. We do have an example last year where Sophos, the security company, they realized some time ago that their firewalls were being, I guess, explored and experimented on for vulnerability research and exploit development by a particular group. And so we spoke about this on Risky Business, not we, you and I, but Patrick and I spoke about this on Srsly Risky Business, where they went on this journey and they started, first they pushed out enhanced telemetry. And so they could then narrow down which devices are these threat actors actually working on. And they combined that with other information they had, like trial license registration data. And they were able to come up with a small pool of devices that they knew or were pretty highly confident that the threat actors were using to experiment on. They were doing vulnerability research on these devices. And so they actually pushed out an implant onto those devices. So that, I think, is a true example of hacking back, where it's tailored to someone who's affecting your products. They were able to understand what vulnerabilities the threat actors were developing and develop protections against them before they were actually used in the wild. They were able to grab malware and again develop signatures and protections against it. So that seemed like a genuine example of hacking back. And the legal basis for that was terms of service, or the end user license agreement. And so Sophos had got legal counsel to say that, yeah, based on our EULA, we think this is okay. And to me, it seems like Google is very much in a similar position. It has products that it develops. It controls the terms of service. If it needs to amend the terms of service in some legalese way to enable it to do these kinds of aggressive things, it can do that. It also has the expertise to be able to say, if we do this, what are the possible follow-on ramifications? Like, it has the expertise to manage the risk of doing something, I'd call it audacious or aggressive or offensive. So that seems to me to be a template. If Google is looking to be more aggressive, that's one thing that makes sense to me. Yeah. And in the context of the whole hacking back discussion, it seems that like there's an underlying rationale for it. We want to engage the private sector more. This is a whole of economy thing.
Yeah.
We can't just leave them on the sidelines. But rather than trying to get the whole private sector involved against potentially any actor, it's maybe get the most capable American companies to do more on their own products, to do more to defend their own products, where they have a legal basis they can jimmy up or construct and like incrementally improve the way that the private sector's involved, rather than aiming for a big bang legislative solution like some sort of hackback legislation.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you and I, Tom, sort of touched last week on the cyber letters of marque legislation that had been proposed, and that was your issue there. It was way too broad, and it was pretty much anyone and everything that the president doesn't like. Maybe this is potentially a really good way to tightly scope that.
Yeah, that's right. I guess the cyber letters of marque, which we spoke about last week, my conclusion from all of that was that maybe there's a set of threat actors where it does make sense to enroll the private sector, and that is these scam farms, because they're big, they're decentralized, they're not doing the work of states. They're just massive criminal organizations, and having a bunch of private sector hackers try and disrupt those, maybe that makes sense. Like, that's a good set of targets. And this is kind of the converse. It's that there's a small number of vendors that have the capability to protect their own products. And so this may be, here's a small set of good candidates to encourage them to do a bit more. Maybe not license them to do a bit more, but encourage them.
Yeah, for sure. And moving on now, Tom, to Salt Typhoon. So the campaign has been attributed to 3 Chinese companies by cybersecurity companies in 13 different countries. So it seems like that attribution and that kind of name and shame is a pretty big deal on the surface, but you're not convinced it's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, so historically there have been a few, at least, big bang cyber attributions where a collection of countries has gotten together and said, China, you're doing some bad stuff, we don't like it. Mm-hmm. So there's this one. There was one related to this campaign known as Cloud Hopper. There was one related to the mass hacking of Exchange, Microsoft Exchange servers. And basically, the conclusion is that those have achieved kind of nothing. So a while back, I wrote about how the SharePoint hacking, it's like a mirror image of the Exchange hacking. So whatever we did to deter or punish the hacking of Exchange, it did not make any difference. And I feel that this falls into the same category. So there was an interesting comment by an FBI official to Cyberscoop, and he said that the use of contractor companies was a mistake. It was a failure. And my reading of that was that because these companies have looser operational security controls, they were able to pull on a thread and link it all back to these three particular companies. I won't read out the names because they're kind of Chinese names that don't really, they don't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
Now, from a Western point of view, if you're doing a big hacking campaign, something analogous to Salt Typhoon, and you get caught and busted, that's a huge deal. That's a massive failure. And the way Western agencies think about it is that if you can do something sneakily and quietly, if you don't get detected, you can just keep on going indefinitely, forever. So, for example, if you, I don't think he has a phone, but if you get onto Xi Jinping's phone, you don't want to be detected. And if you aren't detected, you can stay on there forever. And that is an enduring intelligence requirement. Being able to satisfy it forever is very nice. But when it comes to Chinese actors, the way that they seem to be getting enduring access is just digging in even deeper. So I talk about several examples where instead of being stealthy and quiet and not getting detected, they just hack everything. and it's very difficult to evict them. So in the case of Salt Typhoon, there was a couple of articles that said that those companies, that threat actor, had hacked over 80 countries and 200 American organizations. So being named, being outed, it doesn't actually evict them from those networks.
Yeah.
And so if they're, we know who's responsible, but if they're still in the networks, is that a win? I don't think so. My feeling is that the Chinese government will just brush off any diplomatic blowback. It has a standard playbook. Is it a failure by Salt Typhoon to get attributed in this way? I don't think it's good for the Chinese government, but I think they may feel it's just a cost of doing business.
Yeah.
And, this is something we're willing to wear, and the benefits outweigh the risks.
Yeah. Sort of an annoyance, but moving on. Let's keep going.
Exactly.
Because I know you love when I ask you to make predictions. You do mention in the newsletter that this isn't so much a failure, and that failure will be when they get evicted from the networks. Do you see that happening? Or happening anytime soon?
No. Is the short answer. They will get evicted from some networks. There was a piece I wrote, a senator in the States spoke about the cost of evicting Salt Typhoon from America's telecommunications network, and he described it as astronomically high. So even if he was exaggerating, which he likely was, it was Senator Mark Warner who's involved in intelligence issues. So he should have some idea. Even if he was exaggerating, it seemed to me that the cost was like 100-fold too high. So even if he was exaggerating tenfold, it's still tenfold too high.
Yes. Finally, Tom, and just very briefly, I want to touch on what's the very commonly misquoted Mark Twain quote, Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated.
Yep.
It seems that's kind of the case with Apple's UK stoush. So what's happened here?
So the Financial Times has viewed a document that was submitted to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. So the backstory is that Apple was issued what's called a technical capability notice. So this is an order from the UK government to do these things for us, to allow us to have lawful intercept capability. And the legal way to challenge that is to go to the IPT, that Investigatory Powers Tribunal. And so this is a document that's prepared by the IPT as a basis for discussion. And it can provide some details of what the ground truth was. And so the technical capability notice wanted Apple to provide the UK government with the capability to access iCloud data from potentially anyone all over the world. And so far, that's what is up for argument in the case that will be heard next year, I think. So last week we had news, I'll use air quotes news, that it was not going to affect US citizens. And a lot of people interpreted it as the UK government has backed out and is not going to pursue the technical capability notice. It seems like it's going to go ahead, or at least the court case is going to go ahead. I expect that there will be some carve out for US citizens. It doesn't appear that that's formally happened, but the matter's still up for adjudication. We'll have to wait and see. More to come, I guess.
All right, we might leave it there, Tom, but thank you so much for joining me once again. And of course, you can read and subscribe to Tom's Seriously Risky Business newsletter over at our website, risky.biz. And Tom, look forward to catching up again next week.
Thanks, Amberleigh.